There are moments in life when everything you relied on suddenly moves. Doors close, people change, plans collapse. And if we're honest, our first reaction is panic. We ask God, why would you allow this? But what if the very disruption you're resisting is the divine rearrangement you've been praying for? God is not a God of confusion, but he is a God of transformation. And transformation often requires a shift. When God shifts things, it's rarely comfortable, but it's always purposeful. Sometimes God shifts your environment because he's trying to shift your perspective. He allows the ground beneath your feet to move so you'll stop trusting the ground and start trusting him. What you call a setback may actually be a setup for God to show his power in a way you've never seen before. Think about it. God doesn't waste pain. He recycles it. He takes what the enemy meant for harm and repurposes it for growth, maturity, and destiny. The loss you experience may be God removing what could no longer go where he's taking you. The delay may be God protecting you from arriving too soon. When God shifts everything, he's not punishing you. He's positioning you. He's aligning circumstances with calling, timing with purpose, and faith with obedience. But here's the key. You can't benefit from the shift if you fight it. You have to trust the hand behind the movement. Faith is believing that even when life doesn't make sense, God still does. When the pieces don't fit, God sees the full picture. And when you surrender to his process, the very shift that shook you will become the testimony that strengthens you. So don't fear the shift. Don't resent the change. Don't mourn what God removed if it was blocking what he's about to release. Stand firm, stay faithful. And remember this, if God allowed it to move, it's because he's moving you forward. Disruption is one of the primary tools God uses to bring about real transformation. We tend to associate God's work with comfort, stability, and predictability, but spiritual growth rarely happens in those conditions. When life is smooth, we settle. When routines are familiar, we become comfortable. Disruption, however, shakes us out of complacency and forces us to confront what we truly believe, who we really trust, and where our confidence is anchored. Many people interpret disruption as evidence that something has gone wrong, but in God's economy, disruption often means something is being corrected, redirected, or elevated. When God disrupts a pattern, it's because that pattern can no longer sustain the future he has planned. What worked in one season may become an obstacle in the next. So God intervenes, not to destroy, but to rebuild on a stronger foundation. Disruption exposes misplaced dependence. When familiar structures are removed, we quickly discover what we were leaning on more than God. It could be a job, a relationship, a title, or even a long-held plan. God allows these supports to shift so our faith can be purified, not diminished, but refined. Just as fire reveals the true quality of gold, disruption reveals the true condition of our trust. Transformation requires movement, and movement requires change. God cannot take you somewhere new while leaving everything the same. If your thinking, habits, and expectations remain untouched, growth becomes impossible. Disruption interrupts old cycles so new ones can begin. It forces reevaluation. It demands surrender, and it invites obedience at a deeper level than before. Disruption also realigns our priorities. When life is rearranged, what truly matters rises to the surface. What once seemed urgent loses its grip, and what is eternal becomes clearer. God uses disruption to reorder our hearts, shifting our focus from temporary success to lasting significance. In that process, distractions are stripped away so purpose can stand front and center. There is also a spiritual awakening that comes through disruption. When certainty is removed, we listen more closely. When control is lost, prayer becomes more than routine. It becomes lifeline. God speaks most clearly when we are most aware of our need for him. Disruption creates that awareness. It opens space for divine instruction that we might otherwise ignore. Disruption separates who we were from who we are becoming. Old identities often cling tightly, even when they no longer fit. God uses disruption to loosen that grip. He allows situations that challenge how we see ourselves so we can step into a fuller, truer identity rooted in Him rather than in performance or approval. Transformation is not just about doing something new, it's about becoming someone new. It's important to understand that disruption does not mean God has abandoned you. On the contrary, it often signals His involvement. He is actively shaping, pruning, and preparing. Like a gardener who cuts back healthy branches to produce greater fruit, God allows temporary discomfort for long-term growth. The cutting may feel harsh, but the intention is always life. When viewed through the lens of faith, disruption becomes an invitation rather than a threat. It invites us to trust God's wisdom over our understanding, His timing over our impatience, and His plan over our preferences. Transformation happens when we stop asking God to restore what was and start asking Him to reveal what will be. In the end, disruption is not the enemy of progress. It is often the doorway to it. God disrupts what is familiar so He can establish what is fruitful. What feels like unraveling may actually be divine rearranging, carefully designed to move you closer to the purpose, strength, and maturity He has always intended for you. When stability is removed, it exposes the true source of our security. Many times we believe we trust God, but in reality, we trust God and our circumstances. As long as life feels predictable, our faith can quietly lean on what is familiar. But when God allows a shift that removes what once felt solid, it forces a decision. Will we cling to what is visible, or will we anchor ourselves in what is eternal? Human nature seeks control. We find comfort in routines, systems, and outcomes we can manage. These things are not wrong, but they become dangerous when they replace God as our foundation. God redirects our trust not by lectures, but by experience. When the thing we depended on fails, we are confronted with the limits of human security and invited into deeper dependence on divine faithfulness. The removal of stability often feels like loss, but it is actually revelation. It reveals how fragile worldly assurances are and how consistent God remains. Jobs change, people leave, finances fluctuate, and health can shift overnight. When these things are shaken, God is not proving their unreliability to harm us. He is proving His reliability to save us from misplaced confidence. The shaking clarifies where our hope truly belongs. Trusting God without stable circumstances requires faith that is no longer conditional. It moves us from, I trust God as long as things work out, to, I trust God because He is God. This kind of trust is mature, resilient, and unshakable. It does not depend on outcomes. It depends on character. And God's character never changes, even when everything else does. When stability disappears, prayer deepens. It becomes less about maintaining comfort and more about seeking guidance. We stop asking God to bless our plans and start asking Him to reveal His will. In this space, trust grows because reliance increases. The more we recognize our inability to control outcomes, the more we lean into God's wisdom and direction. God also uses instability to retrain our spiritual instincts. Instead of reacting in fear, we learn to respond in faith. Instead of rushing to fix everything, we learn to wait. Instead of demanding answers, we learn to walk in obedience even when clarity is incomplete. Trust is not built in certainty, it is built in surrender. Redirected trust changes how we interpret circumstances. We stop seeing hardship as evidence of God's absence and start seeing it as an opportunity for God's involvement. When trust is anchored in God rather than circumstances, peace becomes possible even in uncertainty, not because the situation is easy, but because God is present. There is also freedom in redirected trust. When circumstances no longer carry the weight of our security, they lose the power to control our emotions. Success no longer defines us, and failure no longer destroys us. Our identity rests in God's promises rather than in our performance. This freedom allows us to move forward with courage, knowing that even if things fall apart, we are held together by God. Ultimately, God redirects our trust because he loves us too much to let temporary things carry eternal weight. What feels like instability is often God removing false anchors so we can be grounded in him alone. When trust is fully placed in God, circumstances may still shift, but they no longer determine our direction, our peace, or our hope. Loss and delay are two of the most misunderstood tools God uses in the life of a believer. We often see them as signs of denial or failure, but in many cases, they are expressions of divine protection. God sees what we cannot see, and because his perspective is eternal, he is willing to withhold or remove something today to preserve us for tomorrow. What feels like God saying no may actually be him saying, not yet, or even not that. Loss can be God's way of rescuing us from attachments that would limit our future. Sometimes we grieve what we lost without realizing that what we lost could not survive where God is taking us. Certain relationships, opportunities, or roles may have been suitable for a past season, but incompatible with the next one. God removes them not to punish us, but to prevent them from becoming burdens we were never meant to carry forward. Delay works in a similar way. We tend to interpret delay as wasted time, but God uses it as preparation time. While we wait, he is shaping our character, refining our discernment, and strengthening our faith. If God released certain blessings too early, they could overwhelm us, distract us, or even destroy us. Delay is often God's mercy at work, protecting us from the consequences of receiving something before we are ready to steward it well. Protection through loss and delay also guards us from paths that look promising but lead to harm. What appears to be a missed opportunity may actually be a hidden danger. God closes doors we are eager to walk through because he knows what lies on the other side. He blocks shortcuts that would cost us integrity, peace, or spiritual growth. In his wisdom, God values our wholeness more than our urgency. Loss and delay also refine our motives. When something is taken away or postponed, we are forced to examine why we wanted it in the first place. Was it for purpose or prestige, calling or comfort? God uses these moments to purify our desires, so that what we pursue aligns with his will rather than our ego. In that refining process, our relationship with God deepens because our dependence on him increases. There is a hidden protection in the timing of God. Arriving too early can be just as dangerous as arriving too late. Premature success can expose us to pressures we are not prepared to handle. God delays elevation until humility, wisdom, and endurance have been developed. The waiting season becomes a shield, protecting us from collapsing under the weight of blessings we are still learning to carry. Loss and delay also teach us to trust God beyond outcomes. When the expected does not happen, we are invited to trust God's heart instead of his hand. We learn to believe that even when prayers seem unanswered, God is still actively working on our behalf. This kind of trust produces spiritual maturity and emotional stability that cannot be developed in seasons of instant gratification. What makes loss and delay especially painful is that they often come without explanation. God rarely reveals the full reason behind his decisions in the moment. Instead, he asks for faith. Over time, perspective brings clarity, and what once felt like rejection is revealed as redirection. What once felt like absence is recognized as protection. In the end, God's protective love is not always gentle, but it is always intentional. Loss and delay are not evidence that God is withholding good from us. They are evidence that he is guarding us from harm. Even when we don't understand the process, we can trust the purpose, because a God who sees the end from the beginning never removes or postpones anything without a reason rooted in love. Before God elevates a person, he carefully positions them. Promotion in God's kingdom is never accidental and never rushed. While people often focus on visibility and advancement, God focuses on alignment. He is more concerned with where you are standing spiritually than where you are going publicly. Positioning is the unseen work God does in private long before the results are seen in public. God positions through circumstances that seem ordinary, uncomfortable, or even unfair. You may find yourself serving where you feel unnoticed, working harder than others, with less recognition, or remaining faithful in places that appear stagnant. Yet these moments are not wasted. They are intentional placements designed to shape your character, deepen your humility, and sharpen your obedience. God uses where you are to prepare you for where he is taking you. Positioning often involves responsibility before authority. God allows you to handle small assignments faithfully so you can be trusted with greater influence later. How you manage what you have now reveals how you will manage what you are praying for. Faithfulness in obscurity proves readiness for visibility. God promotes those who have learned to serve without applause and obey without explanation. Sometimes positioning includes being placed under pressure. Pressure exposes weaknesses that must be addressed before promotion occurs. God allows stress, opposition, and challenges not to break you, but to build resilience. Strength that has not been tested cannot be trusted. By positioning you in demanding environments, God ensures that when elevation comes, you are not crushed by its weight. God also positions people relationally. He places you around individuals who stretch you, correct you, and sometimes challenge you. These relationships are part of your preparation. They teach accountability, patience, and wisdom. Even difficult people can be tools God uses to refine your responses and mature your spirit. Promotion without relational maturity leads to isolation, but positioning builds the capacity to lead well. There are times when God positions you by removing you from what feels comfortable. He relocates you emotionally, spiritually, or even physically to realign you with his purpose. What feels like displacement is often divine placement. God knows that remaining in familiar spaces can limit growth, so he shifts you into environments that require faith and dependence on him. Positioning also involves timing. God aligns you with the right moment, not just the right opportunity. Being gifted is not enough. You must be ready at the appointed time. God synchronizes preparation with opportunity so that when doors open, you are equipped to walk through them with wisdom and confidence. A door opened too early can be just as damaging as a door closed too long. While positioning can feel slow and hidden, it is one of the most important phases of spiritual development. It builds integrity, discernment, and endurance. These qualities cannot be rushed. God is not delaying promotion to frustrate you. He is positioning you to sustain it. What God gives suddenly still requires preparation beforehand. When promotion finally comes, it is clear that it is God's doing. There is no confusion about the source because the foundation has been laid by him. Those who have been properly positioned do not seek glory for themselves. They recognize the process that shaped them. They walk into promotion with gratitude, humility, and dependence on God. Ultimately, God positions before he promotes because his goal is not just to elevate you, but to establish you. He wants what he places in your hands to last. Proper positioning ensures that promotion does not ruin you, distract you, or pull you away from him. Instead, it becomes a platform for purpose, impact, and faithfulness that honors God and blesses others. Faith is revealed most clearly when life is shaken. When everything feels secure, faith can remain theoretical, but when circumstances are disrupted, faith becomes practical and necessary. Shaking exposes what is real and what is fragile. It reveals whether our confidence is rooted in God or in conditions. In moments of uncertainty, faith determines whether shaking will produce fear or testimony. Shaking has a way of amplifying emotions. Fear, doubt, and frustration often rise quickly when stability is threatened. Yet faith does not deny these emotions, it redirects them. Faith acknowledges the reality of the situation while refusing to give it final authority. It declares that God's power is greater than present trouble and that his purpose is not canceled by temporary chaos. This shift in perspective is what turns shaking into strength. Testimony is not born from comfort, it is formed through endurance. The stories that inspire others are rarely about easy victories, but about trust maintained in difficult seasons. When faith holds steady during shaking, it becomes evidence of God's faithfulness. What once looked like collapse becomes proof of God's sustaining grace. The struggle becomes a witness that God can be trusted even when outcomes are uncertain. Faith also transforms how we respond while being shaken. Instead of retreating, faith presses forward. Instead of becoming silent, faith continues to pray. Instead of surrendering to despair, faith chooses hope. These responses do not remove the shaking, but they redefine its impact. Faith allows us to stand firm without becoming bitter, to remain hopeful without becoming unrealistic. Shaking strips away self-reliance. When our own strength proves insufficient, faith teaches us to lean on God's strength. This dependence is not weakness, it is wisdom. God's power is most evident when our limitations are clear. Faith allows us to exchange anxiety for assurance, not because circumstances change immediately, but because our trust shifts to the one who never changes. As faith grows through shaking, confidence deepens. Not confidence in ourselves, but confidence in God's presence and promises. We learn that survival is not accidental, it is intentional. God sustains us not just to get us through, but to show us that his grace is sufficient. The very thing that tend to undo us becomes the proof that God is actively at work. Faith also gives meaning to the shaking. Without faith, hardship feels random and cruel. With faith, it becomes purposeful. We begin to see that God is using the shaking to refine us, strengthen us, and reposition us. Faith allows us to interpret pain through the lens of purpose rather than punishment. This understanding transforms suffering into growth. Testimony emerges when we reflect on what God has carried us through. Looking back, we recognize moments where giving up seemed easier than believing, yet God sustained us. These reflections build spiritual confidence, not just for ourselves, but for others who hear our story. Our testimony becomes a bridge that helps someone else cross their own season of shaking. Faith turns personal struggle into communal encouragement. What God does in us during shaking is not meant to remain private. When we share how God kept us, others are reminded that they are not alone and that their shaking will not last forever. Faith multiplies when testimony is shared, and hope is restored in places where fear once dominated. In the end, shaking is unavoidable, but defeat is not. Faith does not prevent the shaking, but it determines the outcome. When faith is active, what was meant to weaken you becomes what strengthens you. What threatened your foundation becomes the evidence that your foundation is secure. Through faith, shaking is transformed into testimony, and struggle becomes a declaration of God's sustaining power.